Hi, this is Parish President Cynthia Lee Sheng. This is the next installation of our Next Level series. We like to call Next Level as a way of managing. I like to highlight certain directors who really have raised the bar and really looking at creative ways of governing. And so we're really proud of our Next Level series. And in this time, it's a unique situation because we're going to meet with two directors at the same time. You'll understand why, and it'll make more sense as we have our conversation. But it's our Director of Emergency Management, Joe Valiente, and Sarah Babcock, our Chief Administrative Assistant. And I think, you know, now things have, we're still recouping from Ida. We're still recovering from Ida. Obviously, we were in Grand Isle yesterday. But now is a good time to kind of debrief as to the craziness of the past 2 years and our response. It has been much, as I say, we have had to play defense quite a lot in the past 2 years. And just a conversation about that. I believe that our response to COVID and having to work so many different levels of COVID had us sort of in that response mode already and let us just, when Ida hit, we didn't even take a breath, we just kept going. All the departments were ready, all the departments were in response mode, and I believe that because of the frenetic nature of the year and a half, it helped us respond to Ida so much better. So with that, I want to introduce Joe Valiente. As the head of our emergency management. You've probably recognized him on many of the announcements and the briefings that we did during Ida, as well as Sarah Babcock too. So let's start just with a brief introduction of how you came to be in Jefferson Parish and what your background is.
So I was a police officer for 36 years, New Orleans Police Department. My last 12 years I was assigned to the special events section, which we did all the major planning for all the major events. After 2005 Katrina, Jerry Sneed, then the Director of Emergency Management for New Orleans, pulled our unit out of the police department and interfaced it with the emergency management section of NOSEP. That's where I received my background training in emergency management, and then I continued that through 2012. I retired in 2012, at which time I went into business for myself, and then I was asked by Mike Yenny's administration to come and take over the Emergency Management Department in Jefferson Parish.
And what I've learned in the past 2 years is that emergency management is a completely different animal altogether in terms of departments. It takes a certain kind of personality who can handle it. It's a very high stress, rapid response for a long period of time. We're not talking about just, you know, a day or two, but, you know, of course, as with Ida, I mean, we were working 24/7 for 2.5 weeks straight, and it certainly takes somebody who feeds off of that energy, I think, to be in that, right? You have to like that.
It's true. What I was doing in New Orleans for 12 years with planning the major events was not a lot different from what we do here. This is much broader. It expands over state and federal lines. And so you just have to be much better prepared for this. Yeah. And also, I'm responsible for a lot larger area here than I was in New Orleans. My mission in New Orleans was much more focused. Here it's broad.
So I will say, you know, from my time in Jefferson Parish, emergency management, we thought of it as quick response, right? We want to be ready for search and rescue. And then what happened was with COVID, this was the first time that we really were having to deal with a healthcare issue, a public health issue. And so we took the position in Jefferson Parish that, you know, we want to be good partners with our hospitals. We can't just sit by and watch our hospitals do all this. So we pushed out COVID, we pushed out testing, but that was really why when I had an opening on our staff, I wanted somebody specifically with a public health background. And that's with the addition of Sarah. And Sarah, remind me of, I don't remember exactly the date you started, but it was not that much before Ida. I mean,
yes.
Right?
Yes, so I started on April 26th, which gave me almost exactly 4 months of experience in Jefferson before Hurricane Ida hit. And so everyone in the EOC knew I was walking around still introducing myself to department heads and Jefferson Parish people, but because of my background and work within the region, I already knew a lot of the community partners and the state agencies. And so because this is a natural fit for my work, I was able to to kind of keep going with those partnerships while still figuring out the internal processes.
Yeah, we definitely benefited from that. So let's just go to COVID first. You know, we did, I mean, I'm proud of the fact that we've worked so well with our partners, both, you know, all of our hospital systems. And when anybody calls us and says, we have, you know, some vaccines, or we have this extra, we want to do it, we're all ready to go and set up any kind of way. And both of you are integral to that process for us, as well as our public information office, to just get the word out very quickly, right? So I think we've been really good about getting a heads up that we get resources, and then on the ground doing the groundwork to get it to the public as quick as possible for COVID and with IDA. So talk a little bit about that work that has been continuing to go on and doesn't seem to be ending.
So I can still remember the morning that we received the call from GOSEP to tell us that Health and Human Services was going to give us a call. It was back in March of 2020, I believe. And they were told, yeah, we think we have a pandemic coming up. It's going to be bad, and we need to start preparing now. And of course, we took the meeting, and then we started working closely with GOSEP. We started doing quite a few conference calls with GOSEP and LDH and all the state players. One of the lessons that I've learned that was able to help us maneuver this so well was that we understood the nature of what we had to do. We knew we understood what was needed, and we were able to find the subject matter experts that were able to plug in those skill sets to help us get through it. Another thing that we learned from COVID, from an emergency management standpoint of view, was situational awareness. We had to develop much stronger ties with the public, and we had to communicate much better with them, whether it was through a website, whether it was through news releases, through a PIO, Gretchen Hurt. And so we had to develop these different relationships and these different mechanisms as we were going along, because this wasn't your typical issue like a storm or a flood or something along that nature. This was totally different. So it was a learning curve for us. Fortunately, we picked up Sarah Babcock, and what was instrumental in that move for us was that this allowed us to focus more on emergency response, especially during hurricanes, and we were always in a support mode. So we were able to use Sarah's guidance and her wisdom from her experience, and we were able to take that, and we were able to say, okay, we need to set up a site. The site needs this, this, and that. And we were able to plug in all those variables to make those sites successful and do it in a timely manner. So quite often you need someone in the background that has the wisdom that can give you the guidance to help you navigate those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, anything on the testing and the COVID part of it? That I know you're still busy with it.
We are still busy with it, and I think COVID is unique, but maybe not so unique from a major hurricane like Ida, where you have this initial response and then maybe periods of lull, and then you start to get FEMA trailers in, right? And you get busy again. So with COVID, we've had the initial spike, and then we all stayed at home for a while. We started to reemerge, and then you saw a second spike, and now a third, and of course we're on our fifth here. And honestly, this is going to continue for a little while with new variants, and we still have our smallest children aren't vaccinated yet. And so this pandemic has really had a number of ebbs and flows and new things, right? So testing in this massive way has really never been done before. Vaccinations in this way, we had similar things in H1N1, if people, remember way back then, but it wasn't as severe as this, right? We didn't have a whole new vaccine coming out. So it's been a really great partnership, between myself and emergency management, because what I can bring to the table is background knowledge about our communities, fears they already have about our healthcare systems, information about which pockets of Jefferson may have worse health outcomes, or maybe already be hesitant to regular routine vaccines. But I also come with a knowledge of community partners and how to leverage not only our hospital systems, but some of our federally qualified health centers, community clinics that have trust in those communities so we can partner. And then emergency management brings all the supplies and the manpower and helps us figure out how do we maximize the flow through a testing site? How do we maximize the number of people we can see in a location. And so it has been a really good partnership, and every few days it feels like we get a new curveball. We get something else that comes down from the federal government or the state, or a new thing. So it's helpful for me because I get plugged in a little more with the state health department and with CDC, and get a little more advance notice when things might be coming, and I can help monitor the news cycles for what is on our horizon, so that we can be prepared when the next vaccine rolls out or the next round of boosters rolls out.
Yeah.
I just want to add, though, that one of the things that I felt was important when Sarah first came on board, that we as emergency management had to facilitate her ideas and her needs. We needed her ideas to take us to the next level, and I made sure that my staff understood that it was important to me, and I thought it was important to her success also, that we remain open-minded and we say, okay, Sarah, how do we do this? How do you want this to unfold? And we'll help make that happen. So we understood our role, and I think as a result of that, Sarah, I think we formed a good symbiotic relationship where we kind of complement each other, but we try to give each other space at the same time. So I think it's been a very good partnership.
It's a much broader version. I mean, when I try to build a team, and I love working with people, I love tackling a problem with people, but I know the strengths that I bring to the table. I certainly know my weaknesses, and I purposefully look for other people's strengths to round it out. And on a much broader level, you both do that for each other because you have such incredibly different backgrounds, but every issue that we've had, it's required the knowledge that both of you have. So, and I mean, the best examples are COVID and Ida, that I've seen you all work, and I've seen the conversations you both have, and Joe couldn't have some of the conversations that you have, and you couldn't have some of the conversations that Joe had. So I really, I know this is getting in the nitty and gritty of government, but the public should understand, like, that really helped us with our response, so many of the backgrounds that you had.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Ida. I think, every storm is probably different. To me, Ida was just so different. I mean, we had no time to prepare. I remember being at the EOC, and by the time we were supposed to initiate a contraflow plan or an evacuation plan, this was already, we were already we missed that window because it crept up on us so quickly. And the fact that you had a storm that hits us and then goes up to the northeast and kills another 50 people, I don't think in modern times we've had a storm like that. Hit us in the Gulf Coast and then go kill people in New Jersey and New York. And certainly locally, it was a very different storm for us. So let's talk a little about that. And both of you were working together, but really doing different things as well for the Ida response. So Joe, I mean.
So for us, it really fell into two facets, which is typical of what we do. But as far as our preparation, Jefferson Parish is storm ready. It's been storm ready. It was actually storm ready when I took over here. The level of dedication from the entire workforce and the plans that were in place for that were always very, very solid. One of the things that occurred with this storm that really threw us a curveball, and we have a good relationship with Ken Graham in the National Hurricane Service, so we were speaking to him every 4 or 5 hours. But this storm took a very tricky path. It didn't develop like a Hurricane Michael, where it built up a tremendous amount of strength real fast and smashed into a fixed location. It was vacillating, it was bouncing around, it was moving 60 miles east, 60 miles west, and the National Hurricane Center, their prediction really had it going much further west than what it did go. And because of that, I think the state didn't initiate the contraflow soon enough. As it was, by the time they realized that it would become a major storm, we were already past that H hour. So at H120, you want to identify that storm is going to be a Cat 4 or Cat 5 at landfall, and you're in that 10% window. It didn't do that. And by the time it did do that, by the time the National Hurricane Center was confident that it would do that, we were already at like H70. And that was too late to start that activation, which is a long process. The public assisted evacuation, which goes hand in hand with the contraflow, it was too late for that process too. So the next step was to simply hunker down, make sure that we were able to get people out of the low-lying areas, primarily Grand Isle, Lafitte, Town of Lafitte, and Lower Barataria. Those were our primary concerns. We felt like the levee protection system, all the communities that were inside the levee protection system would hold up, and they did. But as it turned out, the storm did track further east than anticipated, and it did a horrific amount of damage to Grand Isle, literally obliterated it. and almost did the same thing to Lafitte. And what was unusual about this storm that it was so deep in nature. Your typical hurricane churns up between 80 and 100 feet of water. This was churning up like 140 feet. So what it really did was it scoured up all this silt that was in these bayous and these wetlands, and it dumped it onto Grand Isle in the form of sand and in Lafitte in the form of mud. So we were faced with a very unusual disaster that we had never seen. As a result of that, though, once we were able to focus on that, once the storm had left, we did our post-storm assessments. What really saved emergency management was Sarah was able to completely take the sheltering part and the evacuation for special needs off our hands. And we worked with her, and we were interfacing with her. But the fact that she took that facet, that component, off of our plate, we were able to focus on the emergency response for Lafitte and Grand Isle, quicker and stronger.
Yeah, that's the big difference with Katrina is that for Katrina, I left. My dad was the sheriff at the time, he stayed, but people weren't there, right? But here for Ida, a lot of people stayed, and now we're without gas, we're without electricity, our water, our sewer systems are so fragile, and everybody's still here. I mean, I think that was very different, and we had to immediately take care of people who lost their homes. As soon as the storm passed, we're having to take care of people, and that's why, Sarah, I do believe it was just, we didn't lose anybody else post-storm for those reasons, because we had your expertise and your knowledge of sheltering right away. Speak to that, because I think it's the people don't realize we took care of hundreds of people for weeks after Ida, which modern times government has not had to do before, and we did it without major event or without any more loss of life or serious illness. So speak to that, because I think that was very critical for us. And like you said, we took that off of emergency management's plate, and we were lucky to have you at that time.
Sure. I think one of the things my background really brings to emergency management is a deep understanding of the needs of our community members, and not just the three of us here, right? The three of us here, we stock up on things beforehand. We are not going to really suffer without power for 10 days. We are able-bodied, healthy individuals, but our community is full of elderly individuals, people who are bedridden, people who don't have neighbors and friends who are checking on them, or they do, but those people evacuated, right? We have people who don't have the means that you and I have to stock up on food and water for their home before a storm. They may not have gone to get their medications refilled. So those are the people that I start to think about immediately, and knowing, number one, when all of the power was out, right? Not just in Jefferson, but in the region, in those initial days, people might remember Entergy was not willing to give us a timeline on restoration. For me, I know that there's a limited window of when someone can get dialysis before they die, really. If they go more than 3 or 4 days, they will die. People at home on ventilators, on medical equipment, they cannot go more than 24 hours without electricity. So for me, that is an immediate, we need to start taking action, at least for those vulnerable populations. The second thing I recognized is because of the power outages, we were seeing instability in our water and our sewer systems. And watching other people run shelters, having personally run shelters, I know you can't run a shelter without water and sewer. That's impossible. And so the immediate decision was that people needed to be evacuated until we had stable water and sewer to be able to shelter here. So in that first week after the storm, we evacuated over 700 people to state-run shelters. Some of those people went to general population shelters. Some of them went to medical special needs. Almost everyone fell into one of two categories: a family with very young children or elderly residents. And those are our two groups that have the most needs. So being able to provide for infants and then our seniors as well. I don't remember the exact timeline, but I think 9 or 10 days after the storm, we had enough electricity on the West Bank where we had stronger water pressure continuously. We had lifted the boil water advisory, and so we were able to start bringing people back to our shelters locally. So we ran 3 shelters for about how many weeks did we?
At least, yeah.
6 weeks.
6 weeks, I think.
Sorry, yes.
And I
we
think it
ran
was about
3
2 weeks
shelters.
after the storm that came back. Yeah.
So 2 weeks after the storm, we opened up shelters locally that at one point there were 3 shelters. We believe it was about 230 people who stayed in our shelters, and it took us about 6 weeks to move them out. And it's important to know most of those people did not go back to their house. They went to the FEMA hotel program, or they got a trailer from the state program, or we found them alternative housing. And it was not just people from Grand Isle and Lafitte, but we saw major damage on the West Bank, in Marrero, in Avondale, and even in Kenner. Plus, we had individual houses all over the parish whose house, their roof caved in. And so being able to provide not only a roof over them for that time, but all the services they need. So these were people who walked in, they had no ID on them. They had no change of clothes. They had no food to eat. They didn't have their health insurance information or a wallet. So to be able to start to rebuild that, to get them phones, to get them the things they needed, plus medical care and social services and mental health, get them medication refills, before we even started down the housing paths.
So let's talk about, all of our experience that we've had now, but we're planning and we're kind of going over it and saying what worked better, what worked well, what do we need to do better across agencies. Joe, speak to that a little bit about that, and also like in terms of the future, right? How do we make this better for the next generation? What lessons have we learned? How do we sharpen our pencils, so to speak? And Sarah, you can talk a little about the community, health assessment. So Joe, let's talk about post-storm. I know we're still in recovery mode, certainly in Grand Isle and Lafitte, and many people still not in their house, but what have you done to kind of look back and say, what worked well? Let's talk about it. What needs to be improved?
One of the components to our responsibility, which was brought to us in 2018 by GOSEP, the state emergency management, was the Unified Sheltering Plan. And even though the plan has been modified twice since it came out in 2018, we never actually executed it. And one of the things I want to bring up real quick before I address that question is that Sarah forgot to mention that Park Playground was used as a triage center where she was actually figuring out whether or not people need to be evacuated, where they need to be evacuated to. And GOSEP, when I'd spoken to GOSEP, they specifically told us how well and efficient that operation went. That it was very helpful to GOSEP that she was able to carry a lot of that water, identify the needs of these individuals, and make sure they went to the right facility. So that is something that we certainly want to bring back for the next event, because again, we only had 20% of the people evacuated for Ida. So you had mentioned that before, that we had a large segment of the population that stayed with no power, no critical infrastructure, no water, no sewage. That's a problem. They couldn't even get gasoline. And of course, everyone knows the problems we were having with our gas stations. These are things that had never occurred. So our focus for emergency management moving forward is, and I've already worked with Sarah, we're on this, we've already spoken about it. We're working closely with State GOSEP. They want to handle a shelter workshop that's going to be regional, actually multi-regional, where we're going to bring in, they feel, up to 100 people that will come to Ilario, and we're going to talk about sheltering. We're going to talk about how we can better interface with the state, and which also includes FEMA. And I think we're going to work closely with her department and her efforts to come up with a sheltering plan on a local basis. And we're going to make sure that Sarah interfaces her plan with the state training so that we can all be on the same page. But I think sheltering is going to be a big item moving forward. And I think the state and the federal government are going to require the parishes to take a greater stake in that. Fortunately, we have the facilities to do it. We did have good plans in place, but I think we're going to be able to make them better and more efficient. So that's going to be our focus for this year. And also, we're going to continue our training as far as it relates to our emergency operators that work here in the EOC. This is where we mesh out a lot of the problems and all the different emergency support functions, which are manned by individuals from all the different departments and agencies throughout the parish. This is where we solve the problems that come in one call after the next. And so I think we're going to try to improve on our training for our EOC partners that man our emergency support function stations. And I think we're going to definitely try to improve our sheltering capabilities. I think those two items moving forward is going to give us the best results, make us more resilient, and do a better job at meeting the needs of the parish citizens. You know, the baby boomers, and that includes me, are getting older, and they're going to require more care, and you know, many of those are going to fall into special needs, and so that's going to be a critical component. I still remember the hurricanes that hit Florida, and when Harvey hit Houston, when CNN was showing you all these senior citizens that were sitting in waist-deep water waiting to be rescued. We don't want that to happen in Jefferson Parish. We want to have a mechanism that we can activate and get them out safely and quickly.
And let's not forget, I mean, it wasn't just your staff doing this. We relied on our recreation staff to do sheltering, which was incredible. You know, that we were just so responsive that, like you said, I think in one person, these are people who normally coach baseball, and they're helping our most vulnerable. And they, you know, we went, and also let's mention, you know, Red Cross was there, and then what was the group?
Our rec department was a huge asset, but also Red Cross. We had some AmeriCorps and CCC members, but then we also were able to bring in Catholic Charities and Louisiana Housing Corporation and our Office of Community Development and Unity, Responsibility House, Human Services Authority, a whole group of people who were able to really provide all the services.
And I know, you know, it's tough during those days, but whenever I would run into somebody who was from another area, like, oh, I'm from Kansas City and I'm here, I would just be amazed, and it made me feel like, oh, there's help. People are actually leaving their homes, coming here to help us. It always kind of gave me a little bit more energy and kept me going, knowing that we weren't forgotten and that people were here to help us. And you know, we want to thank them because there's so many people I didn't get to meet that came to Jefferson Parish to help us. Sarah, talk to us about one of the initiatives we have going on for a community, you know, health assessment. One
of the things you have tasked me with is really evaluating what the public health needs are in our parish. What does that look like? COVID has highlighted, you know, many things about our community, right? We have seen things like less children are getting routine vaccines right now. Individuals are delaying primary care visits and wraparound services. We've also seen in COVID that our communities of color, particularly our Hispanic and Black residents, are catching COVID more often than white residents, and Black residents are more likely to die of COVID because there's a lot of health disparities and underlying conditions that are creating those health outcomes. And so we are undertaking a community health assessment. This is a common tool used by hospitals, used by community clinics, and used by public health to assess what our needs are. So the public-facing part is going to be about 6 months long, a series of meetings and surveys and data collection, so we can examine both the strengths of our public health system, but also our weaknesses. So we're not just looking at how well are Ochsner and LCMC and Tulane performing as hospitals, but what does outpatient care look like? What does mental health care look like? And what about all the other things that impact our health? So are we eating healthy foods? Are we exercising? Do we have safe and affordable housing? Do we have jobs that are paying us well enough to both pay rent and put food on the table, right? All of those impact our health. And so we'll be looking at this from a really holistic perspective. So my goal is that by midsummer, we will have this report to put out about what health looks like, but we will also use that to set some priorities. And that will help me and the rest of parish leadership, yourself as parish president and council, make some decisions about what we need from myself, or what staff that we should bring on. Obviously, we want an emergency preparedness position, but what else? What are our focuses? Is it going to be the increasing homeless rates in our community? Is it going to be looking at our aging population? Is it going to be working on mental health and substance abuse, or maybe a combination of those? And so this assessment, I think, is going to be a really great opportunity to gather a lot of feedback from the community members about what they want to see, but also some hard data about length of life and disease incidents within our community, and how we can better address those things.
And I think we're, as local government, we're in a unique position to understand what's going on out there, but also leverage these different partners that we have, or create separate task forces. I mean, we're just in that middle hub of everything that if we ask people to do something, they'll respond to us because they know we're trying to tackle something, so.
Absolutely. In the months that I've been here, I've been going around to lots of groups and introducing myself, or, seeing old friends, and explaining my new position. And often what I'm finding is that people don't know the other groups out there, right? And so being able to connect a clinic with someone who's providing home-based services for pregnant women and infants, right? To be able to make those connections to that I'm learning what everyone's doing. So when a council member calls and says, we have a constituent with needs, I can better direct them to the right partners. And so it's not just going to be about me doing public health work, but how do we improve the community health across all of our partners.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for spending this time with us. I just wanted to highlight your work. It's been a very, very busy couple of years. I hope and pray that you two are not going to be working too much, doing planning types of work and not response. We're all hoping that 2022 is a little bit different for us, but no doubt you both will be very busy. But just wanted to thank you. I have personally seen you both do your best work. The general public hasn't, and I think it's a good opportunity to highlight that we in Jefferson Parish government, our council, our staff, just worked so hard for these past two years, and I just wanted people to get an up-close look at some of the detail of what kind of work our leadership is doing. So thank you both for being our next level leadership. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.